the big challenge of this piece is it's unique, almost unique, in that although we've had a number of unfinished symphonies over the years, this one was so complete in the first movement that we're giving at the concert, and one other movement had almost completed, and then almost sketches. In fact, there are some bars where there is nothing apart from one little melody. So it was a big mix, and Mahler himself apparently during his lifetime did not wish for it to be performed or used again. And his wife kept hold of the manuscript for over 10 years after his death before anybody got to see some type of representation of the first movement. It's a challenge, but it is in a way it's a great sort of drive to actually not recreate, but actually try and understand what was in his mind, because it isn't just the 10th symphony. The 9th symphony, although it is finished pretty well completely as far as we're aware with all the notes, there are an awful lot of expression marks and other sort of indications which are not even in the 9th symphony. So he was in fact in the middle of writing this 10th symphony when he went back to the 9th to revise. So this isn't the only work of Mahler's that he had other ideas, and our job has always been, what was he thinking, what was he going to do next, which is impossible. But although some instrumentation I'm sure he would have changed, and Derek Cook, one of the number of people who've attempted to recreate the entire symphony, even in this adagio he has added odd instrumental moments. In fact, he's even composed a couple of lines, and I'm not doing that edition for that particular reason. I've gone back to the Universal edition, which is effectively pretty well everything that Mahler has written that we know of in the facsimile, and nothing more. So everything we're putting in is maybe a doubling to change a balance here to make something work. But the main thing is interpretation. It is all the tempos. Are there changes of tempo? There's only one different tempo in the whole of the movement according to Mahler. There are a number of obvious sections which clearly don't work at the same tempo. So there's 101 details, and it gives you a lot of freedom, because sometimes with the early Mahler symphonies, Elgar's another great example, Holst were playing tonight in the same concert, marks pretty well everything. You've not in a straitjacket, but you know exactly what you've got to do. You're in exactly the same era as nearly every other conductor in the world. Here, you could be interpreting completely different tempos, completely different interpretations, without really going against the composer's wishes. We're almost back to Mozart and Haydn, where there are very few instructions, just a character and a few intimations of what's going on, and then a minute of music and nothing until something else comes up, another dynamic or whatever. So we're almost back to the early classical work, whereas his contemporaries would mark every single note. Very fastidious. It continued the genre of the symphonic poem that Franz Liszt invented almost 100 years earlier, actually, but certainly in the first half of the 19th century. And it's a dramatic work. As somebody once said after a concert once, it's the most wonderful film music that was ever written. But before films were written, 1913 this is, so it predates all the soundtracks of the films. It's a very dramatic work, very visual work, clearly. It describes a tremendous atmosphere for every single planet. Whether it's anything like the reality of the planet is not important. The fact is, it's an idea of what Mercury would have been like, what Jupiter is like as a character, and a lot of it's as much to do with mythology as it has to do with the reality of the planets, of course. And I think, apart from anything else, like a number of other composers, Holst hit on a new language, like Stravinsky was at the time, Bela Bartok was. At that time in music, generally, the first 20 years of the 19th century saw an enormous change from an utter domination of Germany and Austria, whole of the 19th century, to absolutely great works of genius being created in France, the Ravel, Debussy, Manuel de Falla, Spain, Elgar in England, Bartok in Hungary, almost at the same time. All the other countries were adding something, and Holst, good English name of course, Gustav von Holst, but he was born in England, born in London, lived all his life in England. But yes, he had German antecedents. But his language and his bitonality, some of the scoring is very, very different. And is almost unrepeatable, a bit like Janacek, a very famous Czechoslovakian composer, who invented a voice, and Sibelius in Finland invented a voice which was really something very, very new. but hasn't been able to be followed because it wasn't part of the mainstream. You couldn't follow as Beethoven could be followed into Schubert, into Wagner, into whoever, Richard Strauss. There was something quite unique about Holst, and I think it appealed to a lot of people. You may say 1 year before the Great War, starting with Mars, Bringer of War, was prophetic. That's the other thing. He wrote it at the right time, certainly. And it has some dramatic moments. The choir at the end disappearing to nothing has never been done before and never been done since. It's a very difficult thing to do, and it's a most wonderful ending to the piece. And a very, very, I suppose Mahler is one of the exceptions who was quite happy to end an enormous symphony, pianissimo and very, very quietly. And Holst is exactly the same, a 55-minute suite ending literally going into the thin air.